What's going on, guys? Vulkan here, and today we are breaking ground on a new survival action RPG entering early access very soon. And by soon, I mean May 17th. So this game has been called Valheim Meets Vampires, and from the looks of it, I think this is going to be incredibly fun. So the game is called V Rising, and it's one that I've followed for a very long time. It blends together the classic action RPG formula with base building and an open world to explore and conquer. So this game is being developed by Stunlock Studios, who made other isometric games like Battlerite and arena games such as Bloodline Champions. So in short, this isn't their first rodeo, and honestly, I'm very excited to see a studio with a track record jump into the ARPG market, because we really know that this genre needs it. It needs it needs a win. It needs a win after everything that we've been through. So back to V Rising. What really is this game? What can you expect from V Rising? Well, it puts players in the role of a freshly awakened vampire, starved after centuries of sleep and looking to hunt down victims for their blood in nearby settlements. Now, this isn't just a small map you get to run around and explore. This is a huge open world game where you can pillage villages, raid bandit camps, battle supernatural enemies, all while staying out of the sun because, vampires. So V Rising takes place in the world of Vardaran, which is made up of 5 biomes. Now each one has its own unique identity. So first up, we have the Fairbane Woods. This is both the largest area and your starting place. Now this is an untamed wilderness of large trees, overgrowth, rocky terrain, and the woods are also home to a bandit faction that'll be our first human enemy we deal with. But we'll also have to deal with wildlife and other magical creatures that live there. Then we have the Dunley Farmlands. Now this is the second largest area, and this was home to Dracula's empire before his fall. Now this area is full of lush farmlands, livestock, humans, and home to the Church of Luminance. Next up is the Cursed Forest. Now this is the northernmost region and definitely a smaller one, but this area lives up to its name with stories that no intelligent being that's ever entered it has come out alive. They've never been seen again. But it is said that this area is also home to the last surviving Dracula loyalists, which are fanatics worshipping his former reign. Now this area is also challenging for players and may be home to a world boss or two. And lastly, we have the Silverlight Foothills, where humanity is at its brightest. This area is home to human civilization and large towns are present, but so is silver ore, which is a very toxic substance to vampires that helped stave off Dracula's reach and ultimately ended with his downfall. So you might have realized we didn't touch on one of the areas, Hollowed Mountains. Now that's either because the developers didn't want to give us a clue about what goes on there to kind of keep that mystery intact, or maybe that means they weren't ready to reveal it because it was still under construction. Honestly, I think it's them wanting for us to discover it for ourselves because there's some really cool stuff in there and they don't want to spoil everything, which I am totally down for, because honestly, letting us go out and discover some of those areas is going to be super fun. So as you can see, this is a pretty vibrant world. There's a lot of variety in areas to explore. But traveling around this huge world isn't just about running on your own 2 feet or transforming into a bat and flying. You also have mounts to ride on. So before, mounts were 100% expendable and they felt the same no matter what horse you jumped on, right? If you rode one, you've rode them all. That was basically the mentality. Well, now they went back and they fleshed these out a little bit more to have some sort of randomized qualities to make some better than others. Some mounts will handle better, they'll run faster, they'll turn quicker, and all of these might be more important to you. And to top it off, you can also name your mounts, so obviously form that bond, right? Get emotional with the animal. And then they also come with storage for all the loot that you've gathered. So once again, you can just pack mule them up and then head back to your castle, which we'll talk about later. So we have this huge open world to explore on our mounts, but what is there to actually do in the world? Well, we have a few things. So first I wanted to talk about the apex predators that roam in the world. So these are champions that stand against vampires. That's the way they're described by the developer, but they also have the best blood to harvest, known as V-Blood units. Now, these are the main way to progress. They are powerful blood types that you can absorb and then glean powers from. So for instance, let's say you're battling like a powerful necromancer and you defeat them. Then you suck their blood, right? You take the blood from them. Suddenly, you gain the power to cripple enemies, harness debilitating magic, and become stronger and essentially become a necromancer. Or let's say you slay a bear and you can capture the strength of the bear through their blood. Or you attack a carpenter and then you suck the blood from the carpenter and you gain their expert crafting skills that you can then go back to your castle and craft some very powerful gear or new things that you can add to your home. Blood contains blood memories is what I'm trying to get at. And these are something very powerful and every vampire needs in order to learn a new skill or to improve themselves or an existing skill. And this is where the game really becomes interesting. This is what I really, really like about this. The different blood that you suck will give you different things. And the developers claim that these encounters can happen all over Vardaran. You can track down units using a feature in your castle called the Blood Altar. And like I said, we'll get to castles in a moment, but this altar lets you set goals for yourself, and then from that, the altar will show what type of blood unit you need and where to find it. But blood doesn't just give you brand new skills, it also lets you enhance your starting skills. So if you want to dive deeper and deeper and deeper into a certain playstyle, you'll have to do some work to get there, but you totally can. If you really like the melee whirlwind style, then you can go find different gladiators or military leaders, take their blood, that way you can enhance those abilities and make them even stronger. And I love this form of freestyle progression to become what you want to become. If you want to be a master crafter, target all of the masters of craft and then learn their secrets. If you want to become a juggernaut in the arena, take out different leaders and gladiators and learn their combat techniques. There are so many different ways to approach this, and I just love how well it ties into the overall vampire theme and how they've kind of packaged everything up together. Now, this blood also helps define your skill set, like I mentioned, but there is one thing that I'm not 100% sure of, and that is, do these blood skills that you learn stack and unlock so that you always have them, or is it limited to a few at a time? So like you have 3 different blood units active, and if you suck the blood of somebody else, you have to choose which blood unit you want to drop and then slot in the new one. I honestly hope it's the former. I hope it's just over time you can unlock a whole bunch of different ones and become this sort of all-powerful creature, but I'm not entirely sure. And scouring the internet didn't really yield me too many results, so we will just have to wait and see how that turns out. So the next thing I want to talk about is combat. So we have a pretty limited look at it so far, but there's still some things to point out. So with this being an action RPG from the creators of Battlerite, you know the combat has to be good. And from the small gameplay clips we've seen so far, it looks like it really does live up to that. So here we get our first look at combat in Fairbane Woods, which looks fast, fluid, and honestly chaotic, which I like. The player is using a crossbow, but we can also get our first glimpse of the UI. We have a health globe in the center with panels on each side housing some different skills. So one looks like it's for like your harvesting skills, like cutting down a tree or mining ore, hence the axe and the pick. While the other looks like they're skills acquired through blood units like we talked about earlier. Now in the upper right hand corner, we have a mini map and a clock to show the hours of the day and when the sun will rise and will set, which is going to be useful because again, we have to stay out of the sunlight. Now we've seen different kind of snippets of gameplay of when you're in the sunlight. It takes a few seconds for the sun to affect you and you can be in the shade of a tree in order to avoid the sunlight. So it's not like if the sun is up, you can't go outside. It's just if you're in direct, just unblocked sunlight, you have a few seconds before it starts dealing damage to you. Okay, so back to the skills really quick. So the skills themselves look incredibly varied. You have ice novas, blood magic, shields, whirlwind, throws, fireballs, all kinds of things that you can build around and use. So overall, I do think there's going to be a lot of variety, a lot of different ways to create your vampire, and a lot of different ways to play through this game. But the next thing I want to talk about is base building, because this is going to be a huge, massive, monumental part of V Rising. So if you're not a big base builder person, then you can probably just throw something together really quick and go out and do your thing. But if you're a housing person and you like base building and all of that fun stuff, this is going to be really just right up your alley. So base building, right? The game gives players the ability to build a castle, and then they can also convert humans into loyal thrall servants to help manage your estate. Now you can build these castles anywhere in the world other than unique points of interest. So if you really like the setup of being on top of like a cliff overlooking a waterfall, if you like to be in like a swamp or the cursed forest, you can do all of those things. You can build your castle wherever you want to build it. Now these castles are closely tied to your progression and they're built from multiple modules, starting with the castle heart. So the castle heart is your central foundation. Everything ties into this thing. Without the heart, nothing survives. So this heart, just like your body, also runs off of blood. So you need to make sure to keep blood pumping through it in order to access different crafting systems and production stations to help give you more power to then take on greater challenges. Now, these stations function just like your typical workstations in any survival game. You gather the required materials, you place them in the station, and then voila, you have a crafted item or an upgrade. Now, we'll dive a little bit more into crafting a little bit later on, but for now, that's the overall loop, and it's pretty easy to wrap your head around. Now, because the castle is your town hub, this is where you can also store loot. You respawn here if you die. You can invite other players to just hang out and chat, because this is, remember, an online game. Right? You're going to have other players that you can play with, whether it's co-op, whether it's getting a big group together to go tackle a world boss. This is an online game. But the thing is, your castle isn't just this like black and white building that you sometimes visit. You can also decorate it to like the nth degree. It is ridiculous. You have an assortment of statues, braziers, a lot of different textures, items, all these like small little knickknacks. You can really make this estate something you're proud of and make it home to you. It's really whatever you want it to be and as detailed as you want it to be. Okay, so earlier I mentioned the human servants, right? The thralls. To help kind of run things for you, right? So I want to talk about a little bit how that process works. So when you're fighting an enemy and you would like to turn them into a servant, you can charm them when their health gets low. Now, once charmed, you have a few decisions you can make. You can keep them in a cell and then feed on them every now and then for their blood. Remember those V blood units we talked about earlier? This is a good way to kind of hang on to the master carpenter, to the military leader, all of those different things. Number two, you can turn them into a thrall to basically do all of your light work. You can have them attack enemies who appear in your castle. You can send them on missions to gather materials like copper ore. Basically, it helps minimize the little stuff that you might not want to do and allow you to just focus on the things that you truly are after. So if you're just after combat and you want to go and like, take on all of these bosses, you can, and just let everybody else in your castle do everything for you. So between these two, I think I'll be turning most of my captures into servants. If I find a solid human with a blood type that I need often, I'll hang on to them so I can take advantage of that. But otherwise, I really want them to do all the light work for me so I can focus on what I want to focus on. Now, because this is a survival action RPG in an online open world with other players, you will have other players who might try to siege your castle and loot your stuff. Now, I believe I heard that there are PvE servers as well, so if PvP combat isn't your thing, you can always skip out on it, so please keep that in mind. But if you do create a PvP character, you will need to prepare some defenses for your castle to prevent other players from just waltzing in and stealing all your stuff. Now, the developers wanted to calm down players a little bit, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, Rust, it's going to be crazy. This isn't going to be like Rust. You're not going to log off one day and then log back in and all your stuff is destroyed and missing. They state that as long as your castle heart is well fed with blood, your castle walls will be incredibly difficult to break and will require a lot of targeted burst damage to breach each and every wall. Now, if they aren't able to break through all of your layers, then your walls will heal themselves over time and it'll be like they never tried in the first place. They didn't want all the hard work of the players to be easily wiped out, so they made breaching castles incredibly resource and time consuming. Basically, they wanted to make it not worth the effort unless you had something and someone else knew, and they really wanted to get in there, which I like. I think building up a castle and putting your estate together and making something you're proud of and having that, and then suddenly you log in one day and it's just all gone, does not sound appealing at all. So I'm glad they went with this direction where it's more difficult to actually siege a castle than anything else, and might not be worth your time. All right, next thing I want to talk about is crafting, because I promised we would jump back into this to talk about it and how it works in V-Rising. So let's break it down. So to be honest, it's not really anything out of the ordinary. When you first build your castle, you get access to crafting benches. You have a basic set of recipes to craft from, but these are just there to get you started, right? They're purely foundational. Now, the real good stuff comes from discovering new recipes, whether it's from NPCs, finding them out in the world, or taking them from other players' castles. But here's the cool part, right? One of the key things the developers wanted to avoid is the whole catch-up period for new players joining existing games. So let's say like after a month of chatting with your friends about the game and they decide to jump in. They want to see what V-Rising's all about. Well, normally you would have to wait on them to find the recipes, catch up, build up their character. That way they can go out and tackle stuff for you. Essentially work their way through the crafting progression system, and that really isn't fun. The whole waiting period isn't fun. So in V Rising, you can share your learned recipes with allies. You can invite someone into your castle and then have them learn all of the crafting stuff that you've acquired so far. That way they can immediately catch up and start working on crafting what they need to in order to go on adventures with you. It's a great compromise to a common issue that we see in games like this. Now earlier I mentioned that people can break into your castle and quote steal your stuff. This is one of those things they can, steal knowledge, right? They can go to your crafting altar and they can learn your crafting recipes. They don't necessarily steal them from you so you no longer have them, but instead they just kind of absorb that knowledge and then move on. So it's not like you're losing out on something, or you're going to log in and your castle got breached and suddenly you can't make a +9 sword anymore. That's not the gameplay loop that they're going after. So the last thing I wanted to talk about are private servers. So because V Rising is a survival game, you can actually host your very own server. That way you can play co-op, you can play solo, it's really up to you. Now the public servers are going to be fully online, so you can meet other players out and about, but if that is not your style, you can actually host your own. And I believe they will have PvE and PvP public servers to choose from. So again, this is like one of those things, if you want to be the admin and kind of like, tinker with the server and tinker with the way the game works, this is going to be up your alley. Otherwise, I think the public servers will be just fine. So folks, that wraps this one up. What do you guys think of V Rising? Does it look like something you'll dive into? Honestly, I've had it on my list for a really long time and it's still snuck up on me. I couldn't believe, like, oh my gosh, we have early access here in a few days. And I haven't been following it as closely as I do some other games, but anyway, here we are. I mean, we're a few days away from early access, ready to jump in, and I am beyond excited. So thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more action RPG content. This has been Vulkan, and I will talk to you guys next time.